you very much. So yes, like you said, my name is Ben Ilegbodu. I am super excited to be here. Also, yes, because my family's here from Houston. They drove over to see me. But before I get started, I wanted to mention that my slides, I tweeted out a link to my slides on my Twitter, I guess is what you call it. So at BenMVP. So if you go there, you can find a link to the slides. There's also a link here at the bottom, but it's kind of cut off. And it's my super long, short URL down there. But either way, find a link to the slides, because I like to include a lot of links to different resources that I've used in order to prepare the slides. So I think that will be super helpful. And I'm just warning you, I'm going to inundate you with a lot of information. So to be able to go back and follow that later will be super helpful, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in. How many people here are familiar with React, have done development in React? How many? Okay, so about half or so. So that's good. For those of you not familiar, React is a JavaScript library, UI library for building user interfaces created by Facebook. I'm super excited about React. I like the ability to be able to make components and compose them together to make bigger components, and just how it makes it really easy to develop user interfaces. So I'm totally drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm all about it, everything I do, and I try to do it in React. And then we have ES6 and ESnext. How many people have developed in ES6, ESnext? Less or so that's perfect. That's exactly what this talk is about. So just some background on ECMAScript in general. It's 21 years old. JavaScript was created by Brendan Eich back in 1995. And we're now have just released the 6th edition of the specification of ECMAScript. So ECMAScript is a specification for the language. JavaScript just happens to be the most popular implementation. You may be familiar with ActionScript from Macromedia days, or JScript in Microsoft's version as well. But JavaScript is the obvious most popular version of it. And ECMAScript, the official standard for ES6 or ECMAScript 2015, was released last August 2015, and then ES7 or ES 2016 is going to be released next month. And the reason for the name change from ES6 to ES 2015 is that they decided to move from this kind of big chunks of features into kind of a yearly cadence. So whatever makes it by that process by a certain deadline gets into the specification. So for ES 2016, these are all the features that were in there. So ES5 rather was released in 2009. So there was a 6-year gap between ES5 and ES6, and there are all these features, over 30 features. I've broken them down into syntax features as well as functionality features there. So instead of making the browsers and engines have to try to play catch up for a year or two, they decided to go to this yearly cadence. So if you look at 2016, there are only 2 features in it. And one is array includes, so you can call an includes method on an array. And then also the exponentiation operator. So instead of doing math.pow, you put 2 asterisks next to each other, and you can do exponents there. So like I mentioned, there's a new proposal process for ES6, and there are about 20 proposals that are active, and it's a 4-stage process. They enter actually at stage 0, because of obviously computer science. There's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, so I guess it's 5 stages, and 4 means it's going to be in the next release. So here we see a couple that are in 3, so more than likely they'll be in ES 2017 next year. But there's no guarantee for when it's actually going to make it in, and there's different criteria for what has to happen for it to make it into the next specification. So I'm going to be talking about some features that are in ES6. Most of them will be in ES6, but some that are also in the stage process. Cool, so just kind of a primer what this talk is not about. So it's not going to be about how to or why to use React. I could spend a whole hour convincing you of the awesomeness of React, but I'm not going to spend that time to do that. I'm also not going to talk about how to develop in React. You're going to see lots of React code, but I'm not going to actually show you how to develop in React. I think you really need a workshop to really get good at that, so that's not the venue for it. And then lastly, not going to talk about every detail. In ES 2015, like I showed you, there were like 30 features, and I only got 40 minutes and to go, so I won't be able to go into the detail, and some of those features are really, really in-depth and really gnarly, so won't be explaining those things. However, what I am going to do is show you React code and show you how to leverage ES6 and ESnext in React. And even if you have never used React before, everything I'm going to show you is just basic JavaScript, so you can use it in whatever library you're using. I mean, really, I kind of used React as clickbait, so I can get to be able to speak. Not really. I mean, it does work across the board, but I think React really lends itself well to ES 2015 and that kind of stuff. So when I go to conferences, I like to see a lot of code and practical uses of it. So I'm going to inundate you with a lot of code examples, and then also I tend to talk fast and like to explain a lot of things. I like to cram stuff in there, so it may be a little fast-paced. So kind of just lean back. If you're used to writing notes and taking notes, I'm probably going to talk faster than you can type. So just kind of lean and absorb in and kind of take in some things. Cool. So like I said, my name is Ben Ilegbodu. I'm a Christian, a husband, and a father. This is my wife, Rashida, and our 2.5-year-old daughter, almost, Simone. And we actually have another daughter that's on the way. The target release date is September 1st. So we have about 3 sprints left until she arrives. She may come early. So we're looking forward to that new feature that's coming along. And like Chris said, my mom and my sister are here from Houston to see me talk. This is probably the only slide they're going to understand in the whole talk. I told my mom last night, she asked me, hey, what is your talk about? And I said, it's about React and ES6. She was like, okay. Well, good luck. So, yeah, I am a senior UI engineer at Eventbrite in San Francisco, the Bay Area. And right now, we're in the midst of converting our JavaScript stack over from Backbone to React. So I'm kind of living and breathing everything that I'm talking about right now. So if you're going through a similar transition or want to just know more, just find me afterwards and I can tell you about how all that's going. And then lastly, I'm a huge basketball fan, love playing basketball, love watching basketball, and since I'm from Houston, I love the Rockets, so that's my team right there. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about. Here's the agenda here. I've broken it down into 2 groups. The top group in green is kind of the features you would use when you're making or writing React components. And then the second group is features that you'd use in data APIs that you'd be calling from your React components. So it's all kind of React related, but the top group is actually when you're writing components. Okay, and for this example, all the code I'm using is from the official React tutorial. So basically, that tutorial, if you're familiar with it, was written completely in ES5. So I'm going to take a lot of the code and then rewrite it in ES6 and ESnext to show you kind of how you can make that translation there. I changed my name in the example. It was somebody else's name, but I put my name in there. Okay, so components. Here we go. So in the example, there's this huge JavaScript file that has all of these React components in here. And you create React components by calling react.createClass and ES5. And it relies on these global includes from script tags. So you include React, you include React DOM, this library called Remarkable, as well as jQuery. So these are all global objects that are then used in this JavaScript include file. And then we have all of these React components like comment, comment list, comment form, and then the main app. And then finally, the last line, if you're not familiar with React, actually takes your React components and inserts it into the DOM. So React is naturally componentized, but yet we have all of these components in the same file. So the first thing I want to do is modularize this code so that each one of our components is in its own file. And the way we can do that is with something called ES6 modules. And now, instead of having global includes or global files or references, we can now import references. And in here, we're importing React, importing Remarkable in the comment file, and then we declare our comment component, and then at the end, we export it as the default export. So now our comment component is now a module unto itself. So whenever you're using node modules, this is effectively what it's doing, but now it's written in ES6. So there are two kind of module formats before ES6. There was AMD format, which was primarily used on the web with require.js, and then there was the common.js format, which was primarily used in node applications. So there are two different formats, kind of competing formats, and ES6 kind of wants to create a format that they can come towards, so just one format. And you can use various tools that will end up transpiling down to either the other two formats, but this is now ES6. And then we have comment list at the bottom that's also importing React, but then now also importing our comment component from before. So now we're actually sharing our own modules that we've created. And then similarly, comment list is exported out. If we continue on, our app imports React, but then also imports comment list and comment form, which I didn't show you. We'll see examples of comment form a little later. And we declare our app and then export that. Then lastly, in the main index.js file, this is kind of the only thing that actually knows about the DOM. It imports the app and then renders the app into the DOM using that document.get element by ID with the app there. So now we're all componentized. And if you are familiar with React, this kind of thing is old hat. Like this is like the basics of React development in ES6. But I wanted to get our structure going so that we can start kind of diving into more minute details and functionality. So here's our comment form, actually, like I said. It's created from calling react.createClass. And what react.createClass is, it's what I call a class factory function. Basically, you call this function, you pass it this huge object literal, and then out comes a class that you can use. And that object literal has this prop types static property that you can declare all of these prop types. It has three other methods: get initial state, handle submit, and then the main render that you see in all React components. And now with ES6, there are ES6 classes. So there's actually class syntax now in JavaScript. And it looks very similar to Java or C#, but they claim that they didn't copy those, that they just came up with the syntax themselves. And I'm like, sure you did, right? But here's the kind of structure. You say class, my class, and then you can extend another class using the extends keyword. And then you can have a special method that's called constructor, where you define everything that you need to construct for the class. And then you can have static methods, and then you can have normal methods as well. But what's missing from here is static properties or instance properties, and I'll talk about those in a second. So if we take our React component and convert it into ES6 format, it looks like this. So now we have class comment form. It extends react.component. And then we declare our constructor. Instead of having get initial state, we can just declare the state in the constructor. So we say this.state equals that object right there. And then we have our handle submit method as well as our render method. And those are pretty much the same as before. What you will notice now is in the class syntax, you no longer have to have that function keyword anymore, colon function or whatever. You just have the name of the method and then the arguments, and then that's the function right there, the method. But at the bottom, you'll see the static property, the prop types, had to be added after the class definition because it's a static property. So you take comment form.prop types and then you assign that object there. So it's kind of unfortunate that we have to declare the static properties outside of the definition of the class, but ES6 classes don't have a facility for declaring static properties or regular properties at all. But there is a proposal that's currently sitting in stage 1 for declaring class fields and static properties. So now we can move the static prop types into the class, just using the static keyword and prop types, and assign it that way. And then now we can move the state declaration, that's an instance property, out of the constructor into its own declaration. So now it's more declarative as opposed to being inside of a constructor that was more kind of an imperative statement. So now using kind of future JavaScript that's coming, we can declare our entire component inside the class definition this way. And I have a link there for more about the specification if you're into reading specifications. So we can take this a little further, and we can actually leverage something from ES6 modules that I hadn't talked about, which are named imports. So instead of importing the entire module or the default import, you can actually pull out other properties of the module. So before I was using react.component and react.prop types. Well, now I can just import that directly from the import statement using the curly braces. And now everywhere I can use prop types and component instead of react.prop types and react.component. And then now that I have the class definition, I can just export default class immediately instead of first defining the class and then exporting it after the fact. So it kind of just makes our code a little bit more succinct, a little bit more tight, without extra verboseness, I guess, there. So one thing, though, to point out is that specifically when you're developing a form in React, typically when you submit the form, you want to reset it to its initial state. And since we made state a property that we assigned, we're going to need a way to reset it to its initial state later without duplicating code, duplicating that object of author and text as empty strings. So what I've done here is pulled out initial state into a constant, even though it's a var, it's a constant, and then using that in state. So the constant is up here, and then I'm using it down here. And there will be code later in the comment form that actually does the reset. So I have a constant here. It's a var, but the only way you really know it's a constant is because I use that kind of upper snake case. But now with ES6, we actually can get real constants. And it introduces two new keywords, let and const, and they're kind of under this umbrella called block scoping. So now we have real constants. We just use the const keyword instead of the var keyword, and now it becomes const. And anything that you declare as const, you can't reassign it later. You're prevented from that. It'll throw an error. And similarly, if you declare something const and you don't assign an initial value, that's also an error. So that's kind of the way that that keyword is protected. And but one thing to know, though, is that const objects can still be changed. So I could take initial state and add an additional property to it, or remove author, or change the value of author, and that's not an error. So it's only the binding, the assignment of the variable that is constant, not the entire value itself. It's still mutable. It still can be changed. So that's something to keep aware of. So we talked about const. Let's talk about the other keyword, let. And the best way to explain it is to talk about something called variable hoisting. Who here has heard of variable hoisting before? Okay, about half of us or so. So anybody who is considers themselves, I guess, an expert at JavaScript, this is kind of one of those things where you hang your hat on. It's like, I know about variable hoisting, right? It kind of sets you apart from those newbies who don't know about it, right? But it's like the dumbest thing ever, right? And people who you can go and develop in JavaScript for years and not even know about variable hoisting and never have to run into it. But when you do run into it, kind of that 5% of the time, you're just like literally pulling your hair out. Like, I'm bald because I pulled my hair out one time because of variable hoisting. True story. So essentially, in this code that I'm showing right here, right, I want to prevent default in the event, and then declare these variables, but the JavaScript engine is actually going to move the declaration of author and text to the top of the method, even though I've declared them after prevent default. So typically what you do is you declare all your variables at the top, whether you're assigning them or not, just to make sure that you're not susceptible to variable hoisting. And we tend to have ESLint rules that make sure that you do that. But now, with let, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Where you declare the variable is where the binding gets declared. It doesn't get hoisted up, which is great, so you don't have to worry about programming like a C programmer and putting all of your variables at the top anymore. Wherever you put it is fine, and if you try to access a variable before it's declared, it's actually an error instead of it not being an error and you're wondering what's going on there. So basically let works how you expect it to work, essentially. I kind of see a lot of ES6 as JavaScript finally catching up to normal programming languages, basically. Okay, so there's this one thing that I've seen a lot of people doing with Const that is kind of a pet peeve that I wanted to call out. So there's this practice of declaring everything const, even as local variables, unless you're going to change the variable. And there's this ESLint rule called prefer const that enforces that. And I don't like it because it kind of dilutes the meaning of what const means. To me, const means that this value is not going to change for the lifetime of the application. It's always going to be this value, and it's set. Whereas in this case, this code example, I'm actually using const inside as a local variable of a method that's set to the value of state that's constantly changing in a React app. Like, that's not const to me. So I don't know exactly who thought this was a good idea, or I think the reason it got proliferated is because inside of Airbnb's ESLint rules, this is set to be true. So if you're developing and using Airbnb's ESLint rule, you're gonna follow this practice. So it's proliferated all over the place. But if you haven't yet started developing, I would suggest you not do this. So, I mean, I guess I don't want to tell you not to do it, but don't do it, okay? Like really don't do it. Just leave your code using lets, okay? Just lets. So we're back to this code here. We've tackled modules, we've tackled classes, we've tackled block scoping. The next thing I want to look at is the actual definition of of author and text. We're basically pulling those two values out of the state. And there's a lot of kind of duplication of code. And we're used to doing this. We've been doing this for years in JavaScript. But now in ES6, there's a new feature called Destructuring. Now, I want to pause in talking about Destructuring because it's kind of the most funky syntax, I would say, that there is in ES6. And I'm afraid that after seeing it, you're going to feel this way to me. Like, this is the reaction I get from people. They're like, no, I don't like it. I don't like you. They take it out on the messenger, right? But I'm telling you, if you keep using it and it gets more familiar, you're really gonna like it. And it's become my favorite feature by far, just because how it makes your code more succinct. Okay, so what we've done here now is taken that multiple assignments and combined them into one. And we're doing that by having this object literal pattern that's on the left-hand side of the assignment. So now we're saying out of state, declare two variables called author and text, and then take the properties out of state that have the same name and assign them into author and text. So this could be better shown with this example here. So that's our before, and that's our after, basically. So now we've gone from 2 lines to 1 line. And if you had 4 things out of state that you wanted to get, you can combine those into 1 line just the same. And you can also rename as well. So in the bottom example, I'm declaring variables author name in full text, but still pulling out the properties author and text. So in the object literal pattern, as you can see on the last line, author is the key of the object literal pattern, and then I'm assigning that to author name variable. So what this is saying is declare author name variable, take the property author out of this.state, and then assign its author name, and do the same thing with full text. So that's the kind of the power of what this is called object destructuring. But you can take object destructuring even further and move that pattern into a function header. So in React, they have something called stateless functions. And instead of having the props, that's an object that gets passed to the stateless function, you actually put your destructor pattern in the header, replacing the parameters so that you can immediately take out properties out of props. So now the props parameter never exists. In this example, I have style and content immediately available to me, and I never have to do props.style or props.content. I just have style and content. So it's almost like, it's like the closest JavaScript can get to having named parameters, which is really cool, because you just pass an object in that has obviously keys and values, and then in the function, you just have those keys and values immediately to you. And it makes it actually very clear to know what properties the function takes and what it's going to use. Instead of just getting this bucket of props, you know, okay, it's actually going to use style and content. So it actually makes it a little bit more easy to understand as well. So we talked about object destructuring. There's also similarly array destructuring. And it's the same as object destructuring, except that the order matters in the pattern. So I've thrown a lot of code up here for you to look at, but I really want to take a look at the third example there. So when you're doing a regular expression match, as we're doing there, and you're doing matches with the groups, you know that you get back in an array. And that array has all of the groups. The first element in that array, for some reason that I've never really understood, is the entire string. And we never use it, right? So we get this matches array, and we always omit matches 0, and then we do matches 1, matches 2, matches bracket 3, etc. to get the other variables. And then we assign those into variables. But now we don't ever have to actually get that matches array. We can immediately destructure it into the variables that we care about. So now I've taken today's date, and now we destructure it into the month variable, the day variable, and the year variable right off the bat, and just deal with that. Never have to have that intermediary array. And in that last example as well, I've shown that you can use array destructuring in a function header as well. Okay, so that's destructuring. Okay, hopefully you guys don't hate me. And if you do now, maybe over time you'll feel a little bit better. Oh yeah, one last thing about destructuring actually that I forgot is that you can combine object destructuring with array destructuring and nested destructuring to do something like this, right? So if your head wasn't exploding already, try to understand what's going on right here, right? And this is an example of just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something, okay? I think this crosses the imaginary boundary of readability. I tried to organize it and indent it in such a way that it's kind of readable, but still, it's quite difficult. Okay, so brownie points, I guess, to anybody here who can tell me first, where's the bug in this code? What was that? Who was that? Who said that? That's right. That's right. This is undefined inside of success, right there. And just like I talked about variable hoisting being something that experienced JavaScript developers lean their hat on, also scope in this is another thing that kind of sets us apart. So you're in an interview and you're like, hey, do you know what's happening in this function? Like, why doesn't this work? And a newbie JavaScript developer is like, I don't know. Why doesn't that work? It doesn't make any sense. Like, it's something that when you start developing, you scratch your head, you pull your hair out once again. And even if you've been doing JavaScript for many years, you still run into this problem. And it's because of this and the scoping. So I have a link there. If you click on the this, that goes into this MDN article that's super duper long that explains about this and scoping and stuff like that. I read it and I don't even understand it, even though I know scoping. So it's a difficult thing to grasp, but this is the situation here. And in ES3, we would solve this by declaring this variable called self, or m, or that. I actually heard that there's some millennials that call it selfie, but it doesn't really matter what the name of the variable is. You have a reference to this, and you can use it now in the function callback, and it's available in scope. And then ES5 came along with bind, function bind, and you can actually pass the this context that you want into the function. And this works, and it's fine, except it's kind of verbose. You're adding .bind after a function. It's kind of weird to have to do. So with ES6, we introduce arrow functions. And arrow functions now solve this problem. Not only are arrow functions less syntax, but they also have what's called lexical scoping, so that the this outside of the function is the same inside of the function. So in here, we've removed the function keyword, once again, and we replaced it with the fat arrow. That's the equal sign and the greater than. That's in between the arguments or parameters and the function body there. So in here, comments is the parameters, equal, greater than, and then the function body there. So it's shorter syntax, but then also it actually works how you would expect. And there are multiple kind of forms that the arrow function can have. So if you have one parameter in your arrow function, you can actually omit the parentheses altogether and just have it there. And similarly, if you're just returning a value immediately, you only have one statement, then you can omit the curly braces. That's what we see in the top example. But if you have 0 parameters or you have 2 parameters, then you have to surround it in parentheses. And similarly, if you have more than one statement, or you want that one statement to not return its value, then you need to surround the statement with curly braces, as we see in example 3 and example number 4. The last example actually is our example from before with the stateless functions, but now I'm using an arrow function instead of a normal function with the destructuring. And since I have that destructuring pattern there, that's the curly braces, I have to surround it in parentheses as well. So I tend to, when I'm declaring my stateless functions or functions in general, I always make them const arrow functions instead of using the function keyword. I basically obliterated the function keyword from my arsenal of JavaScript development. Okay, cool. So that was arrow functions. I'm kind of halfway or so through this. Wanted to tackle another area of duplication that now ES6 kind of fixes for us. So if we take a look at this line right here, we can notice some more duplication, right? We have the author, we're passing this object literal with author and text, and obviously the author key of the object is the same as the author variable, and same for text as well. So now there's something called enhanced object literals. We get a couple of new features that we can use with object literals, and basically we can just write less code than we did before. So now, if the key and the variable match are the same, you can just omit one of them. So no longer have to do author : author, you can just say author. And the interpreter knows to look for a variable named author and basically do what's at the bottom and before. And it's the same for text as well. So now, whenever I'm having to pass an object literal around, and it's going to be, a variable is going to be that value, I try to make sure I name the value of the variable, or name the variable the same as the key, so now I can use object shorthand, basically. I try really hard, actually, to make that possible. So I end up spending more time naming my variables than it would have taken just to write the value. But I really like this feature as well. It's my second after destructuring. So there's another feature that you can get with enhanced object literals, and it's best explained with this example. So when we declared in the past, in ES5, I guess, when you wanted to make a variable be the key of an object so that you can kind of have a dynamic key of an object literal, you had to do it in these steps. You had to declare the object literal, take the variable, use the bracket notation on it, and then assign that value, because bracket notation didn't work in object literals when you're defining them. But now they do, and it's called object literal computed keys. So now I'm declaring this object, name is the key, and I can just put brackets on the left-hand side of the colon there, and then assign my value in one step, basically. And if I was actually writing this and not trying to explain it to you, this would have been one statement. I would have called this.set with that object literal all in one statement. So going from 3 statements to 1 statement, just with the ability now with computed keys. So that's another feature that we have there. Okay, so done with enhanced object literals. I want to show another feature here. So if you look at this function, it's a join function, and it's very similar to array.join, except that it takes an arbitrary number of parameters after the first parameter, which is the join sequence. So in this case, it's a hyphen. But if you were looking at the join function, just taking a glance, you wouldn't know that this function took more than one parameter. It just looks like it takes the separator parameter, and that's it. It's not until you start reading the code and you look at that arguments keyword that your spidey sense starts tingling, and you realize that there are more parameters that this thing probably takes. And if we take a deep dive into that for loop, we see that, okay, it's actually going through all of the elements after the first one, pushing them into that values array, and then calling join. And the reason for that is because arguments is not a real array. It's a pseudo array, or it's just array-like. So you can't call join on it. Basically, you can only index into it and call length, essentially. So we need to push it onto a new array so that we can call join, right? But now there's a feature called the rest operator. And what that is 3 dots before a parameter, and now it contains all of the values after whatever's come before. So it's basically, it makes it a rest parameter. It has the rest of the values, essentially. So now, when you call join, with you pass in the separator, which is hyphen, and values now equals tick, tack, and toe as an array. And it's an actual real array, so you can call join on it. And the nice thing about this as well is that now it's clear to whoever's looking at the function that this function not only takes separator, but then it takes an unlimited number of parameters, and those are all going to be sucked into this values array, which is awesome. So it's both clear and actually saves a whole bunch of code with that functionality. And you can use the rest operator with destructuring. So we're now combining 2 things together, 2 features that go together. So we have this list that has 5 elements in it. We can take out the first variable and name it to first using destructuring like we saw before, and then the rest of them go into this rest variable. So it's kind of like doing a slice, essentially, a slice of the rest of the array. So it's kind of a nice shorthand to be able to quickly get the rest of those values. So far we haven't seen anything related to React yet. I was kind of setting things up because what you can do in React is actually use the stage 2 feature, which are called rest properties. So before we're using the rest operator with arrays, now we can use it with objects. So we have this object called this.props in React. It's what's used all the time. So now I'm taking out type, I'm taking out default value out of props, and then now everything else that's in props gets put into this input props variable. So it's kind of like using, if you've used underscore, or if you've used Lodash, it's kind of like the omit method on it. So I'm kind of taking out everything but these 2 things. So it comes in super handy, and we'll see an example a little bit later of how I'm going to end up using input props. But it's a nice new feature that's coming along the line, stage 2. So maybe it'll make it into 2017, maybe not, maybe 2018, but we'll see. Okay, so those are all the features that you would use kind of in your React component. let's talk about what you would use in your data APIs. And these data APIs are just JavaScript functions, nothing super fancy there. So here we have some code, math.max. If you're familiar with math.max, you pass in an arbitrary number of parameters to math.max, right? So here we're passing 33, 2, and 9. But if you had an array of values and you wanted to get the max of that, you'd have to call math.apply, math.max.apply, right? And you would pass in a null context because you don't need a context in this case, and then you pass in the array. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, if you've done a lot of JavaScripty ninja stuff, then this makes sense to you. But if you haven't, you're like, what is apply? And why does this work? It's kind of confusing. But now, with ES6, there's something called the spread operator. And the spread operator basically says, take this array and spread all of its elements as individual parameters in the function call. So it's as if now, with that array, 33, 2, and 9, I have called math.max with 33, 2, 9, as before. So it kind of replaces the need. It basically does what apply did, but in a shortened syntax with the spread operator. So that spread operator is the same 3 dots as we saw with the rest operator, and it looks very similar. So to kind of differentiate the two, you use the spread operator, and it takes an array and converts it into multiple parameters, and you use it in a function call. Whereas the rest operator does the other side of the coin. It takes multiple parameters and puts them together and into an array, and you use it in a function header typically. So those are kind of the two differences between those. And when you're doing a lot of React development, you end up using the rest operator and the spread operator a lot because you're going from arrays and back and forth. Because, as we see in this example, the spread operator allows you to maintain immutability in your arrays. You can create new arrays quickly without having to mutate existing arrays. So here we have a scale from literal object. So I'm creating the music scale, and I'm creating a new array literal on this third line right here. And I'm taking pieces from other arrays, start and end, and creating a new array, all in one line. It's kind of like doing concat here, except that I don't have any intermediary arrays from the first concat to the next concat. So now instead of trying to mutate, start, and add, or push values into it, I can create a new array, keep immutability, which is important in React development, and construct a new array from those other arrays pretty quickly. And now, with this spread properties proposal, we can do the same thing with objects that we could do with ES6 spread and array. So I live in the Bay, and the Warriors are the biggest thing out there, and everyone's excited about Kevin Durant joining the Warriors. So here we have the Warriors object literal that has Steph, Clay, and Draymond and their fictitious NBA 2K ratings. And now I want to create the new Warriors object, but I want to add Kevin to that, but I don't want to change the original object I had. I want to create a new object called new Warriors. So I spread Warriors into this object literal, so it's as if I created an object literal with those 3 previous ones, and then now I add Kevin to that. So now new Warriors has 4 elements in it, but I never had to actually change the original Warriors object. All in one simple syntax. Basically 3 dots make the difference, essentially. And with React, there's something called JSX Spread Attributes that kind of takes this similar thing. It's not a proposal because it's part of JSX. So if you remember that example before where I had the input props and I did the rest props and had that be everything else, well, now I can take that input props here and spread it into my JSX definition here. So it becomes whatever's in input props becomes attribute and attribute values like this automatically without having to manually put in each one of those attributes and attribute values there. Okay, so I guess at this point that I'll be running out of time. So, I added this animation here. I still have a couple more things that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to go into detail about the new fetch API that's in the browser that is promised based. So it's very similar to jQuery's Ajax implementation. No one ever writes XHR code directly anymore. We always use a library. But now we have a native browser API called fetch, which is very similar to that API. So it makes it a lot easier to use, and you no longer need your jQuery dependency. jQuery can go away if you're developing in React at least, because now you can just use this fetch API directly. So the fetch API link goes to an MDN article. The promises one goes to a blog post that I wrote about promises. So you can check that out if you're interested. I also wanted to talk about default parameters and how you no longer have to write defaulting logic in your implementation anymore. You can actually have defaulting in your function headers, and those defaults can be function calls, they can be expressions, they can be objects, they can really be anything, which is pretty awesome actually. And you can have defaults, non-defaults after defaults, like you can do all kinds of things with default parameters. So I suggest you check that out as well. There's new APIs for the string object, so you don't have to do index of anymore. You can actually do ends with, starts with, includes, which is great. No more greater than -1 or not equal to -1 stuff. It can be explicit finally. And then similarly with arrays, you have array.find and more kind of array functions. So your dependency on underscore and Lodash can keep going down and down and down, which is great as well. So this is the recap. Talked mostly about the component stuff, kind of cheated with the last 4 really, but I gave you links for where you can find out more information about those. And I created a GitHub repo, which is, there's a link right there, where I kind of went through, I took the React tutorial that was in ES5 and did steps about how to do each one of these. So I did modules, classes, block scoping, destructuring, and I did it in steps so you can kind of see the before and after, how you get to one to the next, and there's instructions on how to do it and more links and things like that. So I suggest you check that out if you're interested in kind of what that looks like in a full application and in real code as well. And here are some additional resources. So that first one, Learning ES6, is a blog series that I wrote, probably wrote about maybe 15, 20 or so blog entries on ES6 and the different functionality there. At Eventbrite, we're writing a coding style guide on React, so best practices in addition to actually how to build React, but how to do it well so that your code is maintainable and things like that. And we've created our own ESLint configuration, kind of similar to Airbnb's, and it does not prefer Const, which is great. I made sure of that one. So that's there. And then I also have this React Fundamentals workshop that you can do to kind of learn how to develop in React if you're interested in that. So lastly, wanted to give some shout outs. Wanted to shout out the conference, Front Porch, and Chris for inviting me here to share with you guys about it. This conference is super awesome. They got a great lineup of speakers. So I know they put in a lot of effort to make this happen, to bring this venue. When I was an attendee, I never really realized all that went into making a conference a success and making it go smoothly and things like that. So it's a true testament to all their effort and tireless effort. So I actually wanted to take a moment and celebrate Chris and his team, if we can give them a clap for what they're doing. Yeah. No, he doesn't want it. But anyways, they do a great job. So it's just tell them thank you, I guess, after the end of this for what they did. Also want to thank Eventbrite for allowing me the time off to come here and to share with you guys. And as one requirement for me to be able to do that is to mention that we're hiring, just like everyone else really. We have offices in San Francisco and Nashville, Tennessee, and we acquired a company down in Mendoza, Argentina. So if you're interested in working in any of those 3 offices, we're definitely hiring, so you can talk to me about that. And lastly, I wanted to thank you guys for coming to the talk. And well, I guess you had to come. There was no other option, really. But thank you for listening to me. One of the main reasons why I do this is because I really like to teach people and help them understand and learn new things about technology and the experiences that I've had. So hopefully throughout this, there's at least one thing that you learned about ES6 or about React. So with that, I wanted to thank you for your time.